So hopefully the stream is working. Can never really tell when you go live. I'm still waiting. The stream health is coming on. Yeah, apparently it's here. Do let me know if you can listen to this, hear the audio, whether or not the visual is okay. It's a bit flaky. I must apologize. It's extremely late. It's 5 to 8. And I usually do these live streams at 5:30, so I do apologise. I'm a little bit jet lagged, so I'm a little bit tired. But because I came back from Miami a few days ago, and I'm still trying to catch up. And today I've been all over the place, so I do apologise for being a little bit disorientated. Today I want to focus on the hands-on with microservices course that I created for Pack Publishing. It's a Python course, and there is an issue that's open on GitHub, and I want to talk about it. And I was going to write a message to the person who created the issue to explain it, but I'm not very good with how to sort of explain technical things like this. Plus, I needed to do a live stream anyway, so I thought I would combine the two and do a demonstration, and then I'll link that to the issue. So what we're going to do first of all is I'll just explain what the issue is. If I go to the browser here, we can see that if I come to there we go. So it's an error, encountered errors while bringing up the project. So quite when I saw this, it was quite a major thing. Haven't been able to jump on it because I was away for the Sunshine PHP conference, which happened last week. So I haven't been able to jump on it straight away. But I wanted to talk about the problem. I wanted to come up with a solution today, and I wanted to talk about Docker ports in general. So this is the output that this fella had, where they ran the docker compose -f docker compose.deploy file up -d. So that's exactly what is in the documentation, and this should bring up all of the services and all of the microservices. And there's an error here. There's an error where it's a bind address is already in use. It's port 80. So this one here, if you can see me highlighting it, that. So saying that there's they've encountered the errors whilst bringing up the project, and there's also a little bit in here about I'm running the script on a VPS, and I don't think I have another container using port 80. If I do, then the Docker container ls is what that is. So we have the ls report here, and we can see that there are a bunch of containers, port 80, 81, 80, 83, 80, 82, and the container that was trying to run was front-end git underscore front-end underscore 1, so that's the actual front end, which is on port 80. And we can see that we have the product service, we have the order service, the user service, and then they're represented databases, so the DB for the product, the user, and the order. But obviously the front end hasn't been created. Now this happens when another container, as mentioned in this message here, in this issue, when another container is currently using the that port, because yes, you can have multiple containers of the same service, sure, but obviously those containers need to have their own individual ports, right? So if you had multiple containers that needed to use the same port, then perhaps you would use some sort of clever load balancing and all of that jazz. But in this instance, what's happened is that there is a container that is already in use of port 80. Now, the trick here is that Docker container ls is what was used. So what we're going to do is we're going to go straight into the terminal. And I actually have this running currently. So if I did a Docker ls like so, or sorry, Docker container ls, we can see all the containers that we've got. This is also the same as doing a Docker ps. so it's the same output. However, if we did, let's just clear down that screen to make some room. If we did a docker ps -- help, we can see that we've also got this option here, which is -a, which brings all of the containers, shows all of the containers. The default is just showing running containers, so that's important. So if you have containers that are no longer running and you just run docker ps, then you'll only show the ones that are running. If you've got any ones that are not running, that won't be shown. But docker ps -a is the thing to show all of them. That's what I use sort of like all the time, regardless of whether I know that everything is running and all of that jazz. If I did docker container ls -help, we can see that it is exactly the same as this command. It actually aliases ps and list, so it is the same. But that would be the first thing to actually look for. Is okay, let's see if there's any containers that I have that aren't running, that are that would be bound to port 80. Now, if that was the case and they weren't running, then the error won't be there, because it needs to be a running container for that to happen. But it's always good to make sure that you've got a fresh environment. I always use Docker machine to isolate and split out all of my my projects, my sites, my systems. As a freelance developer, that's very handy, because I can work on multiple things at once and have them bound to the ports that are published. That are published by that Docker machine. So the container would expose those ports, and then the machine would publish those exposed ports to the machine's ports. But anyway, that's beside the point. So basically, Docker PS and Docker Container LS are the same thing. However, I prefer Docker PS because it's a shorter version of it. But that would be the first thing I would check. Make sure that you've got all of your containers running, and this is what this person on the issue has done, which is fantastic. I'm going to go back to the issue and just read a little bit more. So he's or she is mentioning that they're running on a VPS. So this is an interesting one. I'm running this script on a VPS, and I don't think I have another container using port 80. So it isn't just the containers that could use this port. It could be something completely different. And what I would suggest is to use different tools that are outside of Docker to ensure that your VPS isn't running anything else against that port. Perhaps, for example, and this is something that I've had before, and it's really frustrated me because it took me a long time to work out, was that I was actually running an Apache web server on a VPS, because one of my older clients, they weren't using Docker. So I had in my virtual host file, in my hosts file on my actual local machine, I actually had a series of websites running on a series of ports. I also had, a series of websites running on against a series of aliased IPs. And I had a virtual host. I had my own local Apache. It was a LAMP stack. So it was a Linux Apache PHP MySQL stack on the local machine. So this is nothing to do with Docker. And what I was finding, I totally forgot about this, right? I then installed Docker, and then I thought I could just use, without the Docker machine, I thought I could just use port 80. But lo and behold, port 80 was being used by one of these virtual hosts. And when I turned the machine on, obviously the Apache service was running and was using port 80. But this client that I hadn't dealt with them for such a long time, and I just totally forgot that my local machine was configured and set up for that client. It took me ages to work this out. It took me absolutely ages to work this out. And what I ended up doing was just turning off the Apache service locally, right, and then running Docker. So that's the first thing. The first thing I would check is, have you got anything running on port 80 on your local host? Because if that is the case, then this isn't going to work. You'll get this error because something is bound to port 80. And again, it's something that caught me out, and it wasn't fun because it was like hours and hours and hours. And all I had to do was just turn off the Apache service. I didn't even know it was running. Totally forgot it was running. This is what happens when you buy a very powerful MacBook and you have it for several years and you forget how you configured it when you started out. When I started out on my laptop, I wasn't actually into Docker. I was doing everything through LAMP. So, it just shows you how old that setup was. And it also was an indicator that I needed to use Docker Machine instead of having individual virtual hosts in my Apache config for various different projects. That, and also the fact that PHP wasn't easily configured per project, and I needed to do that in some cases. So Docker Machine is the way to go. And basically, Docker Machine, yeah, it is like it's a virtual Dockerized environment, I suppose, because I use VirtualBox to create that instance. But so I would say to ensure that there is nothing else on that VPS that is using port 80, there's nothing running off of that local host. And of course, you're not going to see this if you do Docker container ls. You're just going to list all of the containers. You're not actually going to see what else is on port 80. Of course, there's other tools that you can use. You could use various sniffing tools to just see if port 80 is being used. And if it is, turn it off, right? Because you need this. You need port 80. Okay. So I'm just going to scroll down a wee bit. So that's pretty much it. And it's very difficult for me to sort of suggest anything else other than, does localhost run? Because if localhost run, then you've got an issue. Yeah, I'll tell you what, the first thing I thought was the issue was that if I go to the code, if I go down here to so there's two Docker Compose files. The first one is the deployment file, and the second one is the docker-compose.yaml file. Now, in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have added these two in the course. However, I wanted to explain what Docker Compose was before I did the whole deployment of all of the containers, all of the microservices. So if we click into here, we can see that this is the first Docker Compose file. We can see that we've got a bound port of 80 to 5000 here. So we can see that we've already got 80 running. Now, if you run this and forget about it, and then run the other Docker Compose deploy file, you may get into difficulties because you're running two front ends essentially, where one needs port 80 and so does the other. However, saying that, both services are called front end, and therefore one would just recreate the other one, which is fine. However, you might get into this issue if you were to run this using -f from a different directory. And the reason being is that it uses the directories as a means of assigning the project in Docker, and that assignment is also used in how they name the containers. So if you were to run this from a different directory, then your containers would have a different name. And that would mean that you have two different containers trying to argue against each other using port 80. That is the only theory, the only other theory I have at the moment in my sort of jet lagged state of where this could possibly fall over. What I highly recommend, sort of the way I would solve this, is I would tear down all the containers. So Docker Compose down. I'll do this now. Let's find the right button. Go to the terminal. Okay, so if I did docker ps-a, we can see all of the containers that we've got, right? So I am currently in the directory for the front end service. So if I did docker compose down, -f, docker compose deploy, and then down. So that's going to remove all of the containers. Now, in theory, there is something running on port 80. So do check out your local host. Do check out your virtual host configuration file if you've got any of that locally. Do check out your host entries or your resolve hosts or whatever you've got set up. If there's anything on port 80, then that is the issue. One solution I would definitely recommend is perhaps you run this in a Docker machine instead of a VPS. So you're creating a Docker engine within a VPS. So I don't recommend using Docker machine in a VPS in another VPS, because that's like a VPS and a VPS, and that's just silly. But if you on your host machine, if you install Docker machine, and then in that machine you then install this course, then you know that you have a clean environment, and you know that the thing is, I don't know what else is on that VPS. When someone says I run Docker in VPS, it's like, well, that's not saying to me that you run Docker in a Docker machine. A Docker machine is a clean Docker environment. It's not a VPS that might have other things and tools and other funnies on it. So I would definitely recommend using Docker machine instead of a VPS, instead of something that you've created yourself just to have Docker on. And you also need to think, well, if you're running Docker within a VPS within your host machine, then you're just extending the amount of levels of craziness. So because it's like Inception in that sense. So I try and keep everything to a single level. So you have your host machine, you have a series of Docker machines on there. I rarely play with VPSs, purely because of this issue. And if I use VPSs, I'm ensure that they are totally clean. I obviously use them for things like AWS and all of that jazz that some of my clients use, and DigitalOcean and Linode. You can throw a stick at these VPS hosts, and I've probably used them. But I make sure they're nice and clean. I don't have anything installed, and there are surprising amounts of stuff that require some sort of web admin, content management system type thing. So make sure it's nice and clean. Don't have any of those kind of jazzy stuff. But yeah, I thought that tonight what I would do, and what I'll do is I'll just prove. Let's just do an up of that. So bringing all those containers back up. So if I did docker ps-a, they're all there. And if I went into the browser, go here, refresh the page, yeah, it's up. So I can't replicate that issue. And just to prove I can, well, I won't do it now because it'll just time out. But yeah, so it works here. It's a classic case of it works on my machine. So without any kind of extra knowledge as to what the VPS has additionally, it's very difficult for me to sort of pin that down. But my suggestions, as I've mentioned, make sure that the VPS is clean. If you can, instead of using a VPS, use a Docker machine, and ensure that there is nothing else running on port 80. And it doesn't matter if it is a container or not. If it's using port 80 is being used. And like I said, I've fallen down this trap before, where an old client was set up on my machine through a LAMP stack, and that was using port 80, and I just didn't realize that the Apache service was running. So there you go. Anyway, I am going to shoot off now because I am knackered, absolutely tired, and I'm just going to keep rabbiting on if not. But yeah. Do check out the podcasts if you haven't done so already. I've got some fantastic guests lined up. Some have come from the Sunshine PHP conference I was there last week. If you haven't done so already, please do check that video. I did a whole review of it. I discussed all the talks that I saw. It wasn't just PHP. There was all sorts of things. There was even a talk that I saw on Vue.js. Yeah, so do check that out. And on Friday, we have a speaker from Sunshine PHP who is currently at PHP UK. And yeah, I won't give any more surprises out, but just be prepared for a talk between me and another speaker, or a speaker. I didn't actually speak at Sunshine. A speaker talking about PHP optimization, and that will be on the podcast on Friday as well as here on YouTube. But thanks ever so much for watching, guys. I know it's been a bit of a weird one tonight, and I hope this has helped someone. I really do. But yeah, cheers, and I'll see you again. Happy coding, everyone. Cheers.